Hello, everyone. Matthew Perry here, and I want to welcome you to our All Around Spurgeon podcast. This is episode 7. And in this one, we're going to be looking at the dual citizenship that God has called us to and how Spurgeon helps us to navigate through pieces of that. But before we get started, I'm lead pastor at Arapahoe Road Baptist Church in Centennial, Colorado. If you happen to be in the South Denver metro area on a Sunday morning, and are looking for a place to worship, we would love to have you. We're at 780 East Arapahoe Road. We've been on this piece of property since 1965. And for Colorado terms, that is a grand long time. I'm thankful that this gospel presence has been on this piece of property since then. And if you have any questions for us, arbc.net. That's Arapahoe Road Baptist Church, arbc.net. And just grateful that you could be here today. So my dissertation dealt with, well, it's looking at it right here. If you happen to be watching by video, it was dealing with implementing Spurgeon's gospel-centered ethic toward the vulnerable. And it was looking at his sermons, and there were a lot of sermons. So I wasn't able to get to every one of them, but I got to a good slice of them, plus reading his autobiography. And one of the chapters that was part of my dissertation was right here. It's called In Relation to Nationalism and Imperialism in Great Britain. I started thinking about this again because in our country, we are gearing up for our presidential election every 4 years. And so this is 2024. We are now gearing up for our presidential election. We're seeing the campaign go on. We're starting to get all of these advertisements about why you should vote for me, why you should vote for me, and why you shouldn't vote for this guy, and why you shouldn't vote for this guy. And so we have our incumbent, Joe Biden, who's in his first term. He's hoping for a second one. And Donald Trump, who was the president previously, and he's wanting another shot at it on the Republican ticket. And listening to this and listening to how Christians navigate this, it's important for us to be reminded of what God is telling us in his word. All right. So the title of the book, let me get it in frame here because I'm backwards here, is Destroying Everything Bad in the Land. And that was from a sermon that he preached in the 1880s. And the name of the sermon was called The Best War Cry. And he was reflecting on the ministry of William Wilberforce, who was part of Parliament for years and years, instrumental in ending the slave trade in England. Wilberforce died 1 year before Spurgeon was born. And so all of evangelicalism in England, not only were they still in the vapor trail of Wilberforce, but they were also under the reign of Queen Victoria, who had Christian leanings. I mean, she was the head of the church as the reigning monarch. But with Wilberforce, that was one of the things that Spurgeon, when he's reflecting on Wilberforce, he was thinking about, look, we need to destroy the church. A healthy church, he says, kills error. And in another spot not too far after that, he says that the church is there to destroy everything that is bad in the land. So when you think about that, you think about our role as a church in the kingdom of God, that really puts it to a fine point, doesn't it? So I want to interact with a couple of quotes that I brought to the surface here. And one of the things here is when he's talking about, well, he's preaching from a sermon from 1880 called Following the Risen Christ. He says this, well, and I lead into it. What does the world have to offer? And I said in the same sermon, Spurgeon proclaimed the rescuing work of Christ. Listen to this. There was a corruption in our mind, and it was working irresistibly toward every evil and offensive thing. In many, the corruption did not appear upon the surface, but worked within. In others, it was conspicuous and fearful to look upon. How great the change, for now the power of corruption within us is broken, the new life has overcome. So this is just showing the gospel saturation of all of Spurgeon's sermons, because by 1880 he had been preaching at the Tabernacle for what, 25 years at that point. So let me make sure I'm doing my math right. Yeah, 25 years, 1855 to 1853, 1880. So 25, 27 years. Okay. So, but one of the things you'll notice about Spurgeon was he loved his queen. He would often say, "God save the queen." He's a patriot as far as his love was concerned, as far as his citizenship was concerned. But he was always reminding us that our citizenship was in heaven, which is from Philippians 3:20 to 21. He had no problem with it, but he said this in a sermon in 1887. So now we're getting on. Now we're getting on to where he had been preaching at the Tabernacle for 34 years. And he said this, "But brethren, let us learn from the citizens of an earthly kingdom to rejoice in our heavenly King. Let us elevate our fervor into the higher sphere. There is another King, one Jesus. And as believers in him, we are more truly citizens of the heavenly Jerusalem than of any city or country upon earth. Our divine Lord has called out believers from among the sons of men to make them a peculiar people, a nation set apart unto himself." Okay. So as much as he loved England, he recognized that his ultimate allegiance was to Jesus. One of the things that he struggled with was the notion of empire. There was a mutiny in 1857, and Spurgeon was asked to preach at a day of prayer and repentance where 23,654 people came. And he was reminding them, all of them, always giving them a chance to remember the gospel, to remember Jesus Christ. But he would also mention how the government in India, the English government in India, that, boy, it sure would seem like that Christianity would move a lot further if there wasn't that cruel government in there. Because England always liked to think of itself as this bastion of Christianity, but yet the way they ended up doing the colonialism for those who were not by birth, by right, they would say, part of their kingdom. Boy, they struggled with it. And so Spurgeon minced no words here. He said, "The government of India has been a cruel government. It has much for which to appear before the bar of God. Its tortures, if the best evidence is to believe, have been of the most inhuman kind." Spurgeon wouldn't lay back on it, whether it was his own country in India, the issues that were going on in Italy in 1864. Oh, he would actually go after one of the former colonies, the United States and the American South. He would make sure that we realize that, boy, we cannot say that we are Christian if we are permitting these kinds of evils against other people. And one of the things that struck me with Spurgeon was how, when he would be thinking about the Great Commission, the borderlessness of him, he didn't see necessarily a border that was dealing with any of that. He believed that a government, especially a Christian government, should be a government that gave liberty to all, because they're image bearers of God and they have value. That was one of the tenets, I think, of our Declaration of Independence, was a recognition that all people are created equal, image bearers of God. We did not follow through on that very well, depending on who you were and where you came from. But that was at least the idea that we could build upon in order to right the ship. How wonderful is that? We have to just continue to remember that we cannot allow ourselves to mix up our political allegiances from our spiritual allegiances. And so the political movements cannot take precedent over the spiritual movements that God is calling us to take place in. So There was a sermon that he preached in 1859. So here he is, not young. He's 25 years old when he's preaching this. And so when he preaches, he says this. He says, now that no thing, and I got to go back. This was 1863, not 1859. He says this, now that was a thing no Roman understood. For 100 years before Pilate came, Jugurtha said of the city of Rome, a city for sale, bribery, corruption, falsehood, treachery, villainy, these were the gods of Rome. And truth had fled the 7 hills. The very meaning of the word was scarcely known. So Pilate turned on his heel and said, what is truth? As much as to say, I am the procurator of this part of the country. All I care for is money. What's truth? I do not think he asked the question, what is truth, as some preach from it, as if he seriously desired to know what it really was. For surely he would have paused for the divine reply and not have gone away from Christ the moment afterwards. Later on in a sermon that he preaches in 1857 regarding the independence of Christianity, he said this, did you ever hear of a nation under the British rule being converted to God? Mr. Moffat and our great friend, Dr. Livingston, have been laboring in Africa with great success, and many have been converted. Did you ever hear of Kafir tribes protected by England ever being converted? It is only a people that have been left to themselves and preached to by men as men that have been brought to God. And I love what he's saying there. He's saying there that, look, a political movement and political coercion is not going to bring about a spiritual reformation and a spiritual transformation. Later on, he says, I believe that British rule there has been useful in many ways. I shall not deny the civilizing influence of European society, or that the great things have been done for humanity. But I do assert, and can prove it, that there would have been a greater probability of the gospel spreading in India if it had been let alone than there ever has been since the domination of Great Britain. Well, as we draw to a close on these things, I just want to just really remind you that the best way that we can help our land is by this citizenship, this earthly citizenship, being our second citizenship. Our first citizenship is to Christ. Our allegiance is ultimately to him, not ultimately to this world, this country, this province. There's no way that should ever take precedence. And when you try to mix these two things, we need to be careful of how we frame it. Whether you're thinking about a theocracy, or if there's a concern about some sort of Christian nationalism, listen, I know that as a follower of Jesus, the best way that I can help my country is by being a sold out follower of Jesus. That's how I can best love my country, is by following what God has called us to do. And I know there will be more favor because judgment begins at the house of God. 1 Peter 4:17 says this. And Spurgeon helps us to be able to navigate through this well. And I'm sure as the election season and the time of the election gets closer, we'll be dealing with this more. And hopefully we can bring on some people that will be able to help us work through this, and especially be able to pull from Spurgeon and help us to be able to work through this. But, our ultimate goal is not the spread of democracy. Our ultimate goal is the spread fueled by the Great Commission. Spurgeon would say that. We would say that. We must say that. Let me know if you have any questions. If there's anything that I can be clearer on. It's a funny word, but here we are. And I'm really thankful that you could join us for episode 7 of our All Around Spurgeon podcast. God bless you all, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.